Just 4 years into their existence, All Elite Wrestling pulled off something pretty damn incredible last August. Not only did Tony Khan have the guts to book Wembley Stadium for the second ever All-In event, his company only went and crammed a whopping 70 to 80,000 plus people, depending on which source you believe, into that gorgeous venue. It was the biggest wrestling event in the history of wrestling and events and all of history with the wrestling events or something. I think that's what they called it, right? But did it really feel like that when all was said and done? Well, we're going to talk about it, aren't we? And exactly how could AEW actually really produce the biggest and best wrestling event later this year? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because I am Gareth, this is What Culture Wrestling, and here is how AEW will deliver the biggest and best wrestling event ever in 2024. Now, speaking as somebody who was lucky enough to be stood on the ground on the historic night that was All In 2023, the word surreal doesn't really do justice to the overwhelming feeling of watching a show of this size go down in a stadium, not under the WWE banner. It was weird. If you'd have told this guy back in 2019 that he'd be shouting AEW at the top of his lungs inside of one of the most iconic stadiums on planet Earth that's held legendary finals and concerts, all those things, if you told me that back in 2019, I'd have probably looked at you like you had 3 heads and said you are ridiculous. It was an evening which contained the final ever All Elite match for a certain CM Punk as he took on Samoa Joe in a 3.5-star classic, according to Dave Meltzer. FTR and the Young Bucks wrote another thrilling chapter into their ongoing saga. Hometown hero Will Ospreay gifted AEW fans another world-class performance, this time against Chris Jericho. And his fellow Brit Saraya even went and lifted the damn gold. Oh, it was wonderful stuff. 2 best pals also clashed in a main event worthy of closing what was the biggest show in this company's history. But for all of those wonderful and important moments in between the ropes, a show heavily billed as the biggest event in wrestling history still didn't end up feeling quite as magical as it should have, did it? There's a number of reasons why this was sadly the case, and a lot of them will be explored in the video you're watching right now. However, rather than just dwell on the mistakes of the past and the ways that last year's All Elite Wembley experience didn't quite live up to expectations, TK's promotion now has the chance to learn from these errors in 2024. Again, make no mistake, that late summer wrestling festival definitely wasn't a complete and utter bust by any means. Thanks to behind-the-scene chaos overshadowing a lot of the action in between the ropes, a number of adored legends not getting booked in the sort of matches they should have inside of a packed stadium, and a few other ill-advised calls though, All In 2023 will go down in history as a good, but not undeniably great event. So how exactly can AEW actually deliver on a promise that wasn't entirely kept last year? Well, for one thing, this year's event already has one massive thing going for it, because it seems like all the CM Punk Jack Perry nonsense has finally been put behind the company. Sort of. Was there really any need to show off this footage of Punk and Perry clashing behind the scenes at All In 2023 on Dynamite heading into this year's Dynasty pay-per-view? I mean, it did heat up Jack Perry a little bit, admittedly, but for many it just felt like Tony Khan and co clinging on to one of the most disappointing and annoying or frustrating things that have ever gone down in AEW history. And it actually evaporated some of the feeling that had been restored in the months post-Punk exit. Now, if I remember rightly, and I was there, I was in the stadium, it did take a little while for this news of the Punker and Perry, their little altercation backstage, to make its way out into the stadium and online, where people just started looking at it going, wait, what's happening here? But once it did, a bit of the wonder was just zapped out of the overall atmosphere and environment. It just all felt a bit like, oh no, something bad has happened again. It's kind of overshadowing the night. Instead of focusing on all the gifted talents that were trying to steal what should have been the biggest show of all time, a lot of the fans who were plugged into the wrestling news cycle who were sat there in that stadium that night were just sat there thinking, well, what does this mean now? Does this mean we're never going to see CM Punk in AEW again? Like, what are the ramifications? What are the consequences of what we've just seen and what we've heard online? Put simply, it was an unwanted distraction. But it is thankfully one that will not be repeated on August 25th, 2024, hopefully, now that, you know, the chip magnet's off doing his thing elsewhere. And fingers crossed AEW are now wise enough now just to fully distance themselves from this particular dark cloud going forward too. And with fans hopefully being totally glued to the ring where the best wrestle this time around and not not focusing on all that behind-the-scenes drama. Tony Khan needs to rectify another jaw-dropping blunder this time around when we hit Wembley again. One of the major criticisms during the build-up, during and coming out of All In 2023 was the fact this historic show was largely made up of matches that were just being used to set up the next pay-per-view that was All Out 2023, which is like a week later. An event going down in front of at least 70,000 people somehow wasn't the destination or even the climactic chapter for pretty much every single feud on show. Now, not to be that person, this is not like a bad faith take or anything like that, but you can't really imagine WWE doing WrestleMania and then just using WrestleMania as just a way to largely set up Backlash a week later, something like that. It just wouldn't happen. Instead of witnessing Kenny Omega and Konosuke Takeshita produce a masterclass under the Wembley Arch, the two were unforgivably chucked into a trios bout that night in Wembley. My little heart broke. Oh yeah, and that trios match then just built to the singles match that they eventually then had a week later. Yay. The stadium stampede insanity, while obviously a riot, and I definitely enjoyed myself when I was there and I was sat in the stadium, it was really just a way of getting as many big names as possible into a match and just stuffing them out there and making them do something crazy, whilst also keeping the Eddie Kingston and Claudio Castagnoli and Jon Moxley and Orange Cassidy feuds a cooking. Even the main event didn't really feel like the peak of a storyline, did it? With MJF and Adam Cole's best friend saga continuing to simmer on after London, and then eventually going out on a bit of a whimper at World's End. Put simply, TK needs to chuck a ton of actual dream matches and bouts that feel like the culmination of storylines onto this year's mega card. When it comes to the matches that need to go down at this year's massive event, well, for me, genuine stars with a capital S like Kazuchika Okada, Tony Storm, Swerve Strickland, Hangman Adam Page, Omega, you name them, they all need something really special, important, and just big. Something big to do in 2024 at All In, because it's All In, it's Wembley, we need big stuff. And all that will go a long way to making this Wembley show genuinely feel like the biggest show on earth. It's not just improved matchmaking that'll make all the difference this time around though. Now, there's nothing wrong with scaling things back a little on the production or set side of things, just to really shine a light on the thousands cramming themselves inside of a wrestling arena. It is that wise move which has led to some of the most captivating visuals in WWE history over the last couple of months. That being said, some situations just call for something a little bit, I don't know, bigger. The biggest wrestling promotion on planet Earth have always pulled out all the stops when it comes to their show of shows. They throw out all the pyro, they have massive entrances, and the sets, the stages are huge. Sadly, the same could not be said for AEW during their first big stadium trip last year, with TK's promotion instead opting for the minimalistic approach when it came to their set, and ironically didn't really go that all in when it came to the entrances and just overall spectacle either. Jericho's quite embarrassing Queen impression, Saraya actually rocking the building, and MJF's devil arrival aside, the majority of the stars on show weren't really made to feel that special during what should have been the biggest entrance of their entire careers. Now, all that being said, one thing the company did absolutely nail was the pyro. My goodness, the pyro. Like the iconic arch exploding time and time again. Honestly, there were times when I was in that stadium where it genuinely felt like the hottest thing on planet Earth, probably because I was on fire. Now spread a bit of that firework budget out towards the underwhelming and rather basic looking set, and AEW will be that little bit closer to presenting their showpiece event as the pinnacle of wrestling that it always should have been. Another thing Tony Khan should probably consider if he really wants to make All In a standout date on the wrestling calendar is putting an end to the immediate follow-up that is All Out. Now, I'm not saying get rid of All Out altogether, just maybe push it back a month or even just a couple of weeks. Sure, the AEW president may like the idea of creating traditions and wants fans to get excited about a dose of All Elite wrestling every time these back-to-back British and American bank holidays come around. But as already noted, having this double whammy go down so close together just inevitably leads to certain matches and huge moments having to be preserved for the less memorable and just less high-profile pay-per-view that follows a week later. Now, all that being said, AEW definitely has the absolutely stacked roster and all the talent to produce two mouth-watering events quite close together within a matter of days. They have that talent. But life would surely be that little bit simpler and just easier for Tony Khan and the gang if they they only had to worry about the one mega show coming into like all-in season. They just had to worry about one show and making that one show the biggest thing on planet Earth instead of just trying to split things up and just juggle things and just giving themselves headaches. And speaking of that absolutely star-studded roster, while AEW absolutely went out of their way to give their largely British audience inside of Wembley last year the hometown hero victorious moments that they were definitely looking for, they have the chance to go one better this time around, don't they? Will Ospreay's showdown with Chris Jericho was excellent because it was always gonna be. It was the Billy Goat going up against an absolute veteran of the business. That's just what happens. But the Aerial Assassin's victory that night just wasn't really one of those powerful and emotional moments that's going to be replayed over and over again when it comes to All Elite's history, is it? If the promotion continues to build and present the best wrestler on planet Earth as the likeable and must-see top name he has been since joining AEW though, there is every chance that Ospreay goes on to lift the big one inside of a stadium packed full of tens of thousands of fans. Just think of that moment. Hell, it's those kind of moments and the inevitable world-class 5-star super mega match that's probably going to go down before it that can turn a good night into a great and even legendary one. But why stop there, baby? Should the mighty Jamie Hayter finally be back to full fitness by then? Having this adored Brit blast through someone like a Mercedes Moné under the brightest of lights would be another spectacular treat. Pac, a star who missed out due to injury too last year, will also be champing at the bit to put on a brutal show in front of his home country. And booking him to throw down in an epic rematch against an Okada or an Omega here is just an absolute tap in. It's an open goal just waiting for the ball to be smashed in by Tony Khan. And while we're at it, if you really want to produce a moment capable of shaking the foundations of a stadium, then I think you should give What Culture's own Simon Miller something more to do this time around too. Why? Because he's a legend, that's why. Get him on that show. Nigel McGuinness lacing up his boots for the first time in over a decade would be a lovely touch too, especially after the Londoner came oh so close to returning last year, only for that clam digger Bryan Danielson to get injured just before his big night. It's not just the sight of AEW's British talent getting their moments in front of their home country that will properly elevate this potential mega show though. Really taking the time to tell a few more detailed and compelling stories containing clear heroes and villains coming into this show will also set the stage for a night to remember. Look, AEW will always possess the talent to produce magnificent, incredible one-off displays at any event. But it's those matches that were built on enthralling elite drama, deep-rooted personal issues, and stories you simply could not look away from that help create some of this promotion's truly classic nights. Looking at 2024 so far though, things are at least looking promising coming into this year's mega extravaganza. AEW's efforts to restore the feeling over the last couple of months have largely been successful. That's away from the odd silly CCTV footage reveal and whatever the hell Chris Jericho's doing. And that is definitely a good thing too, the restoring of the feeling, not the weird Jericho stuff. The company was in desperate need of a soft reboot of sorts coming out of an often bumpy and frustrating 2023. A year which left many wondering whether TK's company would ever rediscover the refreshing identity that once made them the hottest company on the planet. Following on from a well-received Continental classic, the signing of a few genuine bona fide megastars, and a back-to-basics approach of just putting on the best matches you're going to see anywhere on this spinning globe of chaos, this version of All Elite Wrestling actually feels like the sort of one that's capable of producing one of the most special nights wrestling has ever seen in August. They have consistently delivered on the pay-per-view stage all year up to this point, with Dynasty perhaps being the strongest AEW pay-per-view since, I don't know, All Out 2021? The engaging rise of Ospreay, Strickland, Okada, Storm, and so many more, along with Bryan Danielson's streak of insanely brilliant farewell contests, and the ever-reliable Young Bucks, FTR, Samoa Joe, and Willow Nightingale forcing fans to give a damn about whatever tale they're at the center of have absolutely helped AEW just recapture that buzz. But as you probably know already, the world of wrestling just does not ever stop, does it? And a Tony Khan who's got a bit of a sore neck at time of recording is hopefully now just sat there at home thinking of some truly creative journeys to take both his wrestlers and his audience on heading into his second attempt attempt at true stadium greatness. 2024 already feels like it's off to a more positive and promising start than last year, with a less divided locker room and an on-screen product once again really rewarding viewers for latching on to every single little detail, all contributing to a more satisfying overall vibe. It does honestly feel like AEW have all of the tools needed to produce not just another 9 out of 10 night at the wrestling, but the sort of elite event that will never be topped. Have you enjoyed this video today? Then why not check out this other one that explains exactly why AEW is back? It's incredible, it's awesome, it's amazing. It's got Simon Miller in it. Go and click on it. Bye bye.